All right, and we are live on YouTube. And I'm going to let everybody in. Council member, there's over 150 people signed up tonight. I know it's because of you.
Well, I'll take the credit. Thank you.
All
Yeah.
right, here we go. All right, good evening, everybody. As you're joining us, we're just getting started. Takes a couple of minutes on YouTube. Sorry, on what are we on? Zoom, to let everybody in the door. And we are live on YouTube as well. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in a few minutes. If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We're just getting started on Zoom. Takes a couple of minutes to let people in, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Welcome, everybody. You're just joining us. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. As I say, we're going to wait a couple of minutes to let everybody in the door on Zoom. Takes a few minutes, and then we'll get started. Welcome to everybody who's joined us. We'll give it another 30 seconds or until we hit the magic number of my determination, which is now. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Losack. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. This is our Renter Town Hall. Tonight, we're going to feature a discussion on two very important topics. First is on the rent stabilization rent regulations with Councilmember Will Jawando. And then we will have a discussion of an important resource for renters, the Renter Tax Credit Program, with the associate director from the Housing Initiative Partnership or Project, I always forget which, Carmen Castro Conroy. Partnership, thanks. And of course, we're with our staff here, David Mullins, our outreach director, Tim Wong, outreach coordinator, Emily Towie, outreach coordinator, Pat Beckham, and Malek Demir, also outreach coordinators who will be monitoring the chat. We ask if you have any questions or concerns to please put them in the chat. Staff will be monitoring. We will have a period of question and answer after each segment of our discussion. So we'll probably wait to get to your question or concern at that time. But if something comes up that's critical or particularly germane, we may interrupt the panelist to ask that question or raise that issue. A couple of quick announcements of some overview stuff, just so people remember. The rent stabilization bill, which is by far not perfect, was nevertheless something we're very pleased with. It is progress. For people who know the history of Montgomery County and renters' rights, we're in the beginning phases. It's been a long time, but it's just getting started. The bill was signed by the county executive on July 24th. All bills in Montgomery County, and Councilmember Jawando, correct me if I'm wrong, require 90 days before they would go into effect. But this bill also had the requirement that regulations on specific aspects of the bill be developed. Once they were developed, they would then have to be published in the county register for 30 days, which they have been since January 31st, rather. And then for comment and public comment and consideration by the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. That's happening right now. Then it will go to the county council for review and consideration and a vote. Until that vote takes place, there is no rent stabilization in Montgomery County. So we are very much waiting to see where the rent regulations are going, what the recommendations were, and what the outcome is going to be in the council. So with us is, of course, our one of our top renter champions in Montgomery County, someone who grew up in rental housing himself, understands what renters go through, understands the importance of balancing a landlord's interest and right to make a reasonable profit and maintain that profit and maintain keeping up with legitimate related expenses with renters' rights to stay in stable, affordable, quality housing. That balance is critical. So we're delighted to have with us Councilmember Will Jawando. And Will, if you'd like, at any time, I can screen share the regulations if you'd like to go through them that way. But welcome, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Thank you to the Renters Alliance and to all of our allies and advocates who helped make this bill a reality. As Matt mentioned, it was a monumental step forward, but we're not done. And so we've still got work to do. Justice and progress require vigilance, and that's where we find ourselves. But we're on the path here. The good news is within several months, hopefully sooner rather than later, we will have regulations in effect. I did want to mention that I think it's just important to remember how many of our neighbors are renters, approaching 40% of our county of 1.2 million people. And that number continues to grow. As was mentioned, I grew up in rental housing. We moved often in search of affordability and quality in housing. These are real life issues for people in this community, and these are their homes. And just like folks who are homeowners, like myself now, have consistency and know what they're going to have to pay from month to month, from year to year, folks that live in rental housing should have that same right. And housing is a human right, and it has so many connections to so many other things. So I know this group knows that, but I think it's important to ground the conversation in that this is not just an exercise. This is a critical strategy to make sure our county thrives and our residents thrive. So I chair the Education and Culture Committee, but I'm also a member of the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, which will be the first committee to review the regulations once they are sent over officially to the county council after the comments are incorporated and any changes are made. As Matt mentioned, we're in this point now where the regulations have been published for 30 days. There were over 22 submissions of comments, over 150 pages to the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. They are going through those very arduously and quickly and with a fine-tooth comb. Some of them require legal analysis. And so their hope is to, and my expectation and our expectation is that they will transmit updated regs for our consideration that incorporate the what they've heard in the comments, which include community comments and advocate comments, as well as the industry as well, and any legal questions to us in the next, hopefully, week and a half. I talked to Director Bruton today, and their plan is to have those to us by no later than March 22nd, which is about 2 weeks from now. Hopefully, we can get them a little sooner, but I think that's probably when we'll get them. I will be urging my colleagues on the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, including Council President and Chair of the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, Friedson, to take these up. Normally, we do not take things up when we're considering the budget, but this is obviously, I think, a very different situation. And I'm hoping that we can pass these and have a session. We'll probably need 2 sessions in the committee, and then a session, at least a session, at the full council to approve these regulations. So that's a little bit on the timeline, and it's obviously a little bit of a moving target. But that's as of today. You know more than probably even some of my colleagues know now. So
Well,
That's kind of
as I mentioned, council member, there was the warning that you might be interrupted, and this is one of those moments. We are hearing all the way around, as I'm sure you've heard, a great concern about the timing of this, as it seems that many landlords are racing to raise rents ahead of this legislation. Some of them exorbitantly in the double digits that we had seen, in some cases partially prompting the reason for this legislation. They're going gangbusters to do it. And there is some real concern that the budget process is going to somehow eclipse the ability to get this legislation passed. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I share the concern.
And the new fines they're coming up with.
Yeah, I share the concern, and that's why, as I said, my urging will be that we take this up as soon as possible, and try to get it passed, within the very near future. The concern is a valid one, right? I've had this concern since we passed the bill that, there were going to be folks, and we've seen this anecdotally for sure, that were seeking to raise rents ahead of the stabilization. The good news is here, good news, bad news is that some are doing that. Bad news. Good news is that you can only raise the rent once in a year, and this will be in place before the next rent raise. And the market nationally, rents are going down. They have started to go down. We haven't seen that as much in our jurisdiction yet, but the indicators nationally, and we usually are a bit of a kind of a lagger there, are heading in that direction. So the market will help us, I think, in the short term, so that people can't go too crazy on these rent increases. That being said, I share the concern, and that's why I'm going to be urging my colleagues to move forward as quickly as possible as soon as we get the regs with the comments updated.
And we will join you in that pressure to the best of our ability.
I appreciate that. We likely will need it. So we likely will need it. So that's kind of the timeline. And then I'll spend the rest of the time here just quickly going through the regulations themselves, just to give some context of where things are as far as what was submitted. So Matt has pulled up the regs. If you look on pages 2 and 3, which is where we are now, the first section is about the conditions under which around rent increases. And this is just kind of review. So rents can be increased for new leases or lease renewals. And it talks about for rent increases for troubled or at-risk properties. This was as I said, you can only raise the rent once in a 12-month period. And that applies to the first year of a multi-year lease, and to subsequent lease years. So sometimes you have to have the option under our law to give a 2-year lease. It applies to those as well. The other part here about troubled properties was something that we worked really hard on. There's a troubled properties law. Basically, these are properties where you've had consistent problems with maintenance and upkeep. And so you cannot increase the rent what it says here under this regulation. Again, all these are subject to change, but this is the general thrust of it. If you're on the troubled properties list and that the director of the department determines that there's costs that are required to cover improvements of the habitability, and so basically it gives leeway to the director. What we don't want to happen is to have people that are in uninhabitable properties or poorly maintained properties, where they're still raising the rents and they're not maintaining the property. So Matt, I'll leave it to you whether you want to. We can do questions at the end. Probably be the easiest. There's this concept of fair return. which we talked about, and capital improvements, which are the next few pages. Let me just make sure I had notes here. I mentioned that 2 years leases cannot include a rent raise outside of the stabilization. There's restrictions on rent increases for units that are on troubled properties, and then capital improvements. So this is something we talked about. If a landlord has a petition for a rent increase because they had to build a new HVAC system or put in a new HVAC system or make some sort of serious capital improvement, this lays out how those petitions are processed. We think, again, as Matt said, if there should be a way for a landlord to make a fair return. And we do know if you have to put in a major system or do a major upgrade, that does cost money. And so they're allowed to file a petition. And this lays out the requirements of that it has to be sent to all of the tenants, and mail those petitions within 5 days. The director has to review them and get back to folks. So this just lays out, but ultimately the highlight here is that before they are granted a fair return, which would mean an increase outside of the rent stabilization limit, which is 3% plus inflation. If they want to go above that because of a capital improvement, this lays out the process for how. Part of that includes notifying tenants by mail, and that this could be potentially coming, and then the director of DHCA is the one who makes the ultimate decision. I think this is a simplified version, and it's a good protection for tenants. And so I think we're happy about this provision. If we scroll down a little bit more there, we're talking about, this is all about what and I see people asking for the link. So we'll make sure that I'm sure my staff, Hugo is on, or Matt, or some of their team can add the link to the regulations. The fair return itself is described here about what that is. I saw someone a little skeptical, but here's an important part. The director of DHCA makes a decision. The landlord bears the burden of proof to demonstrate that the rent increase should be allowed above the rent cap. So if the landlord initiates the filing, a tenant must be provided notice, as I mentioned, and they have to prove why what this will cost. And you see this here: the total cost of a capital improvement, and there's requirements, must be the sum of any costs incurred, any interest, any service charges. So there are requirements here, and this is all pretty standard language for places that have a fair return. Operating expenses that don't count as expenses. Landlords must claim certain operating expenses in order to file a fair return. And operating expenses that do not count as expenses to be claimed include. So these are things that they can't use: payments made for mortgage expenses, court fines and penalties that they have to pay, contributions to lobbying, political contributions that they might make, any expenses that are as a result of unreasonable deferred maintenance. So if they were negligent, if they let something go bad and then are like, oh, I have to fix it, so it's something that is a fair return. No, that's not a fair return. And again, this is at the discretion of the director. So I think these are some significant protections that it's a really high bar for you to be able to go above this. I saw someone say something about one person. The director really means the department. One of the things we just funded was money as a special appropriation to create the Office of Rent Stabilization, which will hire 9 folks or so who will be working in this office to help manage this process. Next, if we go down, there's again, a lot of this is about capital improvements and what is it's fairly weighted as far as what the requirements are. It's very long. This is basically pages 8 through 16 of a 22-page document. So it shows there's a lot of specificity here as far as when you can apply for a fair return and what those rules are and what doesn't count. On page 16, we have something around the substantial renovation exemption. And this outlines the process for exemptions from rent stabilization if there's a substantial renovation, including the required documentation. So that's some of the things I was talking about here. So a lot of this fair return criteria, when you can do it, what counts and doesn't count, the time period. If you pause there for a second. So if you see a rent established under the approved fair return application remains in effect for a 12-month period, no increase allowed under this section may be applied to a restricted unit for that 12-month period. So this is talking about if there's an MPDU or an affordable unit, that doesn't count for those units, which is another important protection. So, and then as you see here, there are limitations on future fair return requests. So you can't request a fair return, which again is an exemption and a reason exemption to go outside of the rent stabilization. You're not allowed to do that after every year. And if you see here, it says if a fair return applicant applies, they may not file for subsequent application for the greater of 24 months, which is 2 years, following the issue of the approval. So if you get a fair return, that means you can go over 1 year, you can't even apply for another one for 2 years. And I think even if you did, there'd be a high bar for you to have to prove that you have another reason to apply for one. Yes, and I see people asking about the 2-year limits. That's not addressed in here, but yes, you do have to, under current county law, already have to offer a 2-year lease. What a lot of folks have done to get around that is they make the 2-year lease so high that it's exorbitant and that you don't even want to pick it. But under this bill, the rent stabilization law does apply to 2-year leases. So they which is a big deal, and I think it'll help with that problem. The last thing I'll talk about just briefly, and then we can turn to questions, is around the regulation of fees. I saw people asking about that, and that Matt, that starts around page. These are again costs of calculations and renovations and how to calculate those. What a substantial renovation is. The upshot here, and we get to page 19 is when the fees come up. I think go. There you go, right there. The upshot is there's a lot of this regulation, pages 8 through basically 18, talk about how you can apply for a fair return or a substantial renovation, and there's a lot of requirements and what doesn't count and what are the protections for renters. So that's what we just went through. The last major part of this is related to, obviously, the law took care of what the stabilization is, which is 3% plus inflation, capped at 6%. So which means if inflation is 1%, that means the maximum landlord could raise a rent in a year would be 4%. If inflation went higher, as we saw during the pandemic, but it's normally between 1% and 2%, but it couldn't go past 6%. So that would be but in a given year, it could be as low as 3% if inflation was flat, could be as high as 6%. It'll probably be somewhere between 3 and 4 or 3 and 4.5 if history is any guide on what inflation is.
If I could just clarify something for the audience. When you say inflation, we have what's called the voluntary rent increase guidelines, which are derived from an inflation CPI, a cost of what does CPI stand for?
The Consumer Product Index for rental housing.
For rental, thank you. Yeah. And last year was 5.8%, which was extraordinary. But if you had 3% plus 5.8%, you'd be at almost 9%. This bill would have, had it been in place last year, would have capped it at 6%. This year, I think it's 2.6%. So 3% plus 2.6%, when enacted, when it, I should say, when it takes effect, it will be 5.6% for 2024. And on
Correct.
average, as the council member points out, the increases historically have been between 1% and 3%.
Correct. So yes, and thank you, Hugo, for answering the municipality's question. On the regulation of fees, but we are working with municipalities, and I'm actively meeting with City of Rockville council members and City of Gaithersburg and others to try to urge them to pass a similar law. City of Tacoma Park already has a law in place, obviously, so more to come on that. But correct, this does not apply to municipalities. They have to decide to do it on their own. Regulation of fees. So obviously, we've seen during the pandemic and even prior to that, and certainly now, some landlords trying to get around the rent increase issue and charge more money through fees. We heard this loud and clear. It's really a really bad practice, and this section is aimed at bringing some consistency. Again, our goal here is consistency, fairness to both the renter and the landlord, so people can stay in their homes. So this section talks about what are permissible fee ranges that landlords can assess or collect from tenants, such as application fees, late fees, pet fees, lost keys, lockout fees, charges for secure storage units, internet or cable services, and parking. I'm very proud about this because it also says what you can charge fees for. So you can't create these junk fees that are made up fees. And so here you see, you can see on page 2021, what are the caps? So pet fees are capped at $100 per rental term. So your whole term. Lost keys are capped at $25. Parking at 2% and 4% of the base rent, depending on if they're covered parking spaces. So that would depend. So you can't just charge anything. It has to be in that range. We're not allowing there's some things we're explicitly not allowing interest on late fees. So you can charge a late fee, but you can't charge interest on that late fee, which some people are doing. And then that you can't charge more than one late fee per late payment, which is something we also saw. And Matt was just scrolling through the 4% and 2% for parking, and then the 1% on the base. So there's, depending on what type of parking it is. And as I said, you're not allowed to charge more than one late fee per late payment, which is something else that we had seen happening. The bicycle parking fee here is in there. But again, these are just really based on what's happening out there in the market and what is reasonable. I know this could change depending on comments from both the public and industry, but I think, from my opinion, that these are very reasonable fees, and is a way to kind of get at this other problem where things are being created out of a whole cloth or being charged multiple times. So that is, I think I'm close to on time here. I'll pause. But as I mentioned, these are the regulations. I think they're strong. We're going to need to keep them strong, and maybe make some improvements around the edges. But we'll be taking it up here very soon once they're transmitted to us officially after the comments are incorporated, and look forward to passing this and getting these protections in place for, again, our hundreds of thousands of renters and their families in the county. So thanks, Matt.
You bet. Thank you very much, Councilmember. We're working very closely. Obviously, the Renters Alliance put in our own suggestions about the language, and pleased with the fees so far. We wanted to see some consistency in the ability of tenants to rebut an application if they felt it was unfair. Some parts of the language allow for tenants to have a say as to whether or not a landlord is being honest in their application. We want that to be consistent throughout in a process to be spelled out as to how a tenant could do that. We are also, for me personally, the $25 lockout fee. We always operated on the landlord-tenant principle that a landlord should not be able to charge you a fee for anything that doesn't cost them anything. So like a fine of some sort. So if you get locked out, and in my building, we have a 24-hour concierge. They go to the back room, give you the key, go upstairs and let yourself in, bring the key back downstairs. Doesn't cost them anything. So there's no $25 anything. On the other hand, if you're 3 o'clock in the morning and there is no front desk concierge, and if there's a building process that allows you to contact a 24-hour number, which then contacts a maintenance person to come in and let you in, there might be a reasonable amount of fee associated with the cost to the landlord, otherwise calling a locksmith, I suppose. So we didn't want a fee to be charged where one had never been charged before, but also understand a reasonable fee. David, what else did we discuss with the director, Bruton, that we had heard from renters and from our own analysis?
Well, one, it's kind of like across the board that renters have a chance to weigh in, kind of asking where, how, and when that will happen, especially when it comes to things like fair return applications where, you know, they're claiming certain expenses and renters have a firsthand view of what maintenance has and hasn't been done, what fees have been passed on to them, et cetera. But we just want to make sure like there were robust notice requirements for across all the application types. And that was clear in the regulations what that notice entailed, how it would be delivered, and then if it was going to come, you know, with the application or with the decision time. And then we had one of our partners, I think, was really thought it was important that it would be clear that the allowable fees were exhaustive. So anything, you know, there's a provision that said anything that's not on here is definitely not legal. They just kind of, for an accessibility kind of thing.
Yeah,
Right.
just making that
These
clear.
are the fees.
That is the intention, but I agree with the point of making it clear could be good.
You're right. So, you know, we also, while we're sensitive to the need for accuracy and precision, we're also even more sensitive to the need that the perfect not be the enemy of the good here. It seems to us from a legislative process, some of us have been around this block a few times, that we can get it on the books, we can get it to take effect, and then we could still moderate it or modify it down the road if necessary. So, you know, adding again to the issue that we need this done and it's long overdue. We are receiving every day concerns from tenants who may not survive their homes if we don't get this done in the next month or two. And of course, you know, council member, that we're also seeing over the last couple of years the forced migration of working and low-income families from our regions. So definitely a concern. Was there anything else, David, that we had heard from friends and allies and from our own analysis?
For the regulation recommendations?
Mm-hmm.
I think there was when it came to doing the kind of renovations and repairs, I think we had spoken about just making sure that that's licensed and qualified staff, you know, doing those kind of protections. But
as opposed to a brother-in-law charging $1 million to fix your sink, we wanted to make sure that whoever was doing it was actually doing the right thing and not overcharging the tenants ultimately for that.
That makes sense.
Right.
Yep.
And there was something else about shoot.
Well, and then again, in the fair return kind of operating costs calculation world, you know, just making sure that there's just good oversight there, you know, and it's just a lot of deference to the department, right? And so we were noticing that. And so as far as, you know, serial eviction filers, for instance, you know, what kind of legal fees will be allowed to be kind of in that calculus? Folks who kind of might lavish some things upon their staff, where will that fall in? You know, that so. We again, Director Bruton was responsive, you know, when we talked about it, and then we submitted those too. Yeah.
Right. That there, you know, the annual retreat that suddenly created to the Bahamas by the staff was not considered standard operating. cost and overhead. But the other thing was that came up too is that while we are so far pleased with Director Bruton and his understanding of renter issues and support for advancing renters' rights, we won't always have a Director Bruton. And so we are also very concerned that the language, wherever possible, be standardized so that it is regardless of whoever is director, and we can count on it if indeed the department isn't always as favorable to tenant issues as it might want to be now.
I agree, and I think I certainly, that's why we needed to pass the bill, and it's why we need strong regulations that are clear, and a strong Office of Rent Stabilization that builds up that kind of institutional memory and muscle memory, and so those are all going to be important. That's another important item in this budget, that we continue to fund the work. All of this, all these regulations require oversight and from DHCA, and so we're gonna have to make sure that those hires are in there, the money is there, which we appropriated, and that we continue to support that office. But yeah, I agree with you. The regulations need to be strong, and where the director does have discretion, he or she should be acting upon discretion under the very clear guidelines of the regulation.
Precisely. Definitely so. Do we have questions or concerns in the chat for the council member?
Yeah, we had a clarifying question from the first part of the regulations about the 2-year lease. So someone asked in the chat, the cap applies, like if they sign a 2-year lease, it's 6% for both years, right? Like they can't raise it the first year and the second year.
Correct.
Okay.
So you can raise it if you get the 2-year lease, you can raise it once, because that in that lease term,
Right.
which is
Okay.
in that case is 2 years.
I see a question for you about your colleague, Andrew Friedson. Question asking what can be done to urge him to support the expeditious passing of this legislation. Any tricks of the trade, council member?
Well, I'll be meeting with him. I mean, he is committed to not trying to delay this. I do think whether he votes for it or not, I think is unlikely. He didn't vote for the bill. He didn't vote for the appropriation. He was the sole vote against the appropriation for the office. So I think I don't know. It's important to note this is an up or down vote. Of the regulations, we can certainly disapprove and suggest changes to the director, and they can resubmit. But so the method 2 regulation process, Hugo can put a link to that in the chat too. But I'm going to be talking to him, and I know Natalie Fanny Gonzalez, council member, who's other member of the PHP committee, wants to get this done. I think this is of such importance to, again, nearly 40% of our residents that it should be an exception to the rule of getting this done during the budget process. As you know, the county executive will send us his budget formally. He's required to by March 15th, which I believe falls on a weekend Friday this year. So next Friday we'll get his budget, and then we start our consideration shortly thereafter for the next 2 months. This will obviously overlap with that. There are some just genuine logistical scheduling challenges, in that the PHP committee has to take up items for the capital budget and the operating budget. But I certainly would be willing to meet on a day when we don't normally meet, to try a Wednesday, or for example, or a Thursday or Friday, to try to get this done as soon as possible. So whether or not Councilman Friedson supports it or not, I can't answer that, but he has committed to making sure that we get this on. There's no delay. Now we have to, as you know, the delay can be in the eye of the beholder. So we're going to be trying to work hard to get it done as quickly as possible.
Well, a delay is certainly in the eye of the person who has to pay rent. So any other questions for the council member? I see a number of them.
Yeah, there's one in the Q&A. Alan asks, is replacing a 60-year-old elevator that frequently breaks down considered an ordinary maintenance expense or a capital improvement?
That is a great question that I would not dare answer because I'm not sure. And I think it would depend on the circumstances. As I mentioned, there is a provision that if you let something go out of use on purpose, if it's a 60-year-old elevator that was working just fine, and then you tried to not have it work, or was it something that is past its usefulness, and it's such a major expense based on the size of your building, that to a building that's small, that maybe that is a major capital expense. So a large building, probably not. So I think it depends is the answer. And I wouldn't want to, not knowing specific facts, but that would be a question based on the requirements laid out in the regulation that the director in the office would determine whether that is based on the calculations and the kind of requirements laid out in the regulation.
And that gets right to the point too about the importance of keeping tenants informed about an application for exemption and under what circumstances. If, for example, as you point out, council member, you have a elevator that's really old, but the property management or owners have failed to maintain it properly over many years, that would be a deferred maintenance expense that would be negligent that they ought to be responsible for, versus, hey, elevators that are 60 years old eventually become a much larger expense and would require replacement or updating, which could be a capital improvement. Obviously, we'll leave it to the lawyers to work out the specifics of such a thing, but it seems like that would be a major difference. So keeping in mind that tenants know and will have a sense of whether the property management or the landlord has been doing what they're supposed to be doing, and instead of claiming something as an expense that they want to put on top of the tenants.
Very, very good point, which is to your point about making sure tenant input is a part of the process is key.
What else do we got for the council member?
Couple more. One from one of our participants, Clark here, where I just wanted to acknowledge that it sounds like someone's rent was raised twice in a year. And so if that's happening to you or someone you know, we want to hear about that. So we'll put info at Renters Alliance in the chat. Also, Hugo put his information in the chat. So please let us know, because as that was definitely mentioned that that's not allowed more than once within a year already now. So, and then the other one was more of a statute question than a regs question, I guess. But we do get this a lot. There's just confusion around why subsidized units or units that are already in some other covenant are exempted. It feels, when upon reading, I think to folks like that's kind of a left out situation. But I don't know if you could provide some comment on that, if there were problems that you're running into federal law or something, if you could help them understand the why of that.
Yeah, well, one, because units that are regulated and are already abiding by the voluntary rent guidelines. So prior to the passage of this law, if you're a regulated unit or if you're one of our nonprofit providers that's building affordable housing or HOC, they are already abiding by increases at the voluntary rent guideline rate. And that's part of so when you see exemptions, it's because it's not exemption from what it really means is that they already have a set of rules governing them that in some cases are better than even this bill. So, for example, if you're in a restricted unit at one of our partners that they're abiding by the voluntary rent guidelines, which will probably be will be lower than 3% plus the voluntary rent guidelines. So it's not that they're excluded. It's just there's a different set of laws and cross-cutting, some of it federal, some of it just the nature of how they provide support and how it interacts with our MPDU laws, that's why there are some exemptions. But it's not an exemption from the spirit of the law. It's just the legality of it here.
A couple quick answers to some things near and dear to us since we passed this legislation. back in 2015. You are required at every renewal to be offered a 2-year lease. So if you're not offered that, then your renewal is defective. Let us know at info@rentersalliance.org. As the council member pointed out, your rent can only go up once in a 12-month period. If you've had it go up twice in a 12-month period, that's against the law. Let us know. We'll help you seek some redress for that. What else do we have?
Maybe take one more if there's one more burning here. I know you have other speakers and
Knowing my staff, we have at least 6 speakers here.
well, I'll say this, that, I think Hugo put my email and his email in the chat. Hugo's on my staff. Really appreciate all the work. And I'm with you in this fight for the long haul and to make sure it's implemented, not just that we pass it, but that it's implemented. And as was said, please share those stories that those if you're seeing large rent increases or if you're seeing something that's illegal, reach out to the Renters License Alliance, reach out to us so that we can get you in touch and get our Office of Tenant and Landlord Affairs to enforce the laws that are on the books. But really, really appreciate your work and having me tonight.
Well, we are delighted by your efforts on renters' behalf. We've known you to be a champion from the beginning.
Thank you.
And you understand this issue very well. And of course, your legal training doesn't hurt. So we appreciate that as well. When you look at a document like these rent regulations, you know what you're talking about. And you know how to fix it to make it better for renters
Right.
and make it fair as well. So we're very much appreciative of your time tonight, council member. We'll get to some of these other issues. If there's anything that comes up, we'll send it to your office for follow-up. But we also have your back too. So we appreciate your efforts and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
You too. All right. Don't worry, everybody. We know we haven't slayed the dragon here. We know that there are still questions that are going to come up. And we do this all day, every day, 7 days a week. So please send us these concerns, these questions. Somebody did say that they're contacting, the director of housing and all of this. You can try, but we will actually be able to help navigate your issues a whole lot better than going to the top of these organizations first. They are very busy people. And I bug the director of housing from time to time, but I do not take that liberty casually. So we can help you resolve problems before we need to get it all the way to the top. And then when you go to the top, you don't get an answer because they've got too many things coming in. So we can help with that process to get you some answers or a solution. We can also help if you are going through the process the appropriate way, through landlord tenant or code or through a council member and not getting a response. We know how to knock on those doors in just the right way. So also a way in which we can be value added to this process. And lastly, before we turn it over to our next panelist, we have powers that government officials do not have. We're not restricted by certain government rules. I don't mean to say we're doing anything awful, but we have other freedoms to operate publicly as a nonprofit that a council member or a county staff member might be reluctant to do. So do ask us your questions or send us your concerns and we'll help guide you. So with that, it is my pleasure to move on to the next topic of discussion. That is the Renter Tax Credit Program that everyone who's eligible to take full advantage of. It is my pleasure to introduce our dear friend and colleague who works also in the highways and byways on renters' rights and affordable housing, our friend Carmen Castro Conroy, who is the Associate Director of the Housing Initiative Partnership. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt, and thank you to all my friends at Renters Alliance for all the work that you do and for inviting me to speak about this program. I will share my screen so I can better explain how this program works. But first, I will briefly describe who we are as an organization. I'm with Housing Initiative Partnership. We are a nonprofit housing developer and housing counseling agency serving residents of Montgomery County and Prince George County. I'm a certified housing counselor in the Montgomery County office. And as a HUD approved housing counseling agency, we serve tenants and homeowners through our rental counseling, as well as pre-purchase, post-purchase, and foreclosure counseling. All of our services are free of charge. And for appointments, you can reach our main number and schedule appointments in person, by phone, or virtually. In addition to our comprehensive housing counseling program, we also offer home buyer education. We provide tenant outreach and court. And we have the home sharing program for homeowners and home seekers, and our financial empowerment center in partnership with the city of Gatesburg. So I've been invited by Renters Alliance to talk about the Renters Tax Credit Program, which was established more than 40 years ago. It's a state program that serves tenants in the state. So everyone in Montgomery County is included. This program was created to alleviate the high cost of rent, especially to our to tenants that were age 60 or older or disabled. The program then was expanded in 1984 to include tenants under the age of 60 with dependents. So it's under the administration of the Department of Assessments and Taxation, State of Maryland, and that's the page that I'm showing you right now, dat.maryland.gov. Can you all see this page? Thanks. So the renter's tax credit is separate from any type of credit you may get when you file your income taxes. This is related to the portion of the rent that you pay every month. So there are two groups that may be eligible to get this benefit. It's an annual benefit that you would have to file an application and submit to the state for review in order to get the credit. The state has now expanded this program, and in addition to the hard copy applications, they can also take online applications. The deadline to apply for this program is October 1st. And for anyone over the age of 70, it can also be retroactive 3 years. So we're going to look at see who qualifies for this credit. Is credit that if you're eligible, you get once a year, and it's up to $1,000. So we have a group of age 60 or over or 100% disabled that would meet the criteria based on the portion of the rent. So we're looking at this chart. It goes up to $73,000 a year as income and up to $2,000 in rent. So anything below, it will have to meet the portion of the rent that you're responsible for. Even if you get a rental subsidy in Montgomery County, the Rental Assistance Program, or HOC Housing Choice Voucher, it's going to be based on the portion of the rent that the tenant is responsible for. So if the income doesn't exceed and your rent exceeds the maximum income, you may be eligible to qualify. Most of the people that qualify for this credit are age 60 or older. But in addition, we also have another chart for those age 60 or under with dependents under the age of 18 claim in their taxes. So for that group, we can see that the gross income limit is much lower, and it's again based on the number of people in the household. So a household of 4, maximum gross income would be $26,500. If you meet the income criteria, we encourage you to submit your application to the State Department of Assessment and Taxation. It takes about 3 months for the state to review your application and determine if you're eligible. If you qualify, you do get a check for a maximum of $1,000. So I'm gonna
Carmen,
briefly,
forgive me
Yes.
for interrupting. Do you know if those are 2022 numbers? Do you know if they changed in 2023 or 4?
they do not change. They should have changed the year though, but let me show you how you also find the same chart in the application for this year. Let's wait for the application to download. So usually every year applications are available starting the month of February, March. And the deadline again is October 1st. So this is this year's 2024 renter's tax credit application. It's very simple. It's 2 pages, page 1 and page 2. You do have to submit a copy of your most recent income taxes, so that will be 2023, and a copy of your lease, because part of the application is going to require that you provide the portion of the rent that you pay per month in 2023. So you can see here how the state requires that information. Page 2 is all about wages and income. You're not obligated to file taxes if your only source of income is Social Security retirement, but you are encouraged to provide proof of any income, including retirement income or pension or any other type of income. So the SSA form 1099 will be sufficient if you're not filing taxes. So this is page 2 of the application. It's very simple. Sign, date, and mail it to the state. So all the instructions are in the form. I encourage everyone to keep a copy of what you submit, never to submit original forms in regards to taxes or your lease. Keep those and send copies. Again, you can also submit this application online. So in addition to page 1 and 2 of the application, we have all the instructions here. So for the question of 2022 gross income, it's updated in this form. It does show 2023, but let's see. Yes, the income limit has increased, and we can see a
Increased.
household of four, maximum income 30,000.
Well, that's good. Even though a household of 9 at 55,000, I think they'll be eating each other as well as paying the rent. That's still pretty low, but it has changed to 2023.
Yes. So you can see for 2024 application, this is the most up-to-date chart. There are 2 charts. Chart 1 is for those age 60 or older. And that's the one that we see up here, with column A being maximum income and column B maximum rent. And chart 2 for age 60 or under 60 with dependents under the age of 18. That will be the chart right here with 2023 gross income limit. Only those in the first group, age 60 or older or 100% disabled, can apply while receiving housing subsidies. Those under age 60 are not allowed to submit an application if part of the rent is paid with housing subsidies, or if they reside, like it says here, if you and did not receive, living with you and did not receive federal or state housing subsidies or reside in public housing for age 60 or under. Age 60 or older, you can still apply. So it's very simple. Here are all the instructions on how to respond to each question and how to submit your application. It does take about 3 months to hear back from the state. Sometimes the state may require additional information if it doesn't make sense, like in regards to your current rent and your income taxes. If the numbers don't match, the state may request additional information for clarification. If not, if approved, you do get a check in the mail. If you want to check on the status of your application, here's a phone number to call after you submit, or if you have questions prior to submitting, you can always give them a call. So as a housing counseling agency, we do provide this service If you need help with submitting your application, you can contact our office at 301-916-5946. Let me take you back to our page. If you can see our address, we're at the App County Regional Service Center for anyone who would like to make an appointment in person. 12900 Middlebrook Road, Suite 1500, Germantown. And our number for Montgomery County residents, 301-916-5946. Any questions?
In addition to contacting you, Carmen, are you all holding field events at apartment communities or other places where people can go?
Yes, we have in the past, and would love to go anywhere we're invited, especially any of the apartment buildings where we know that tenants are 60 years or older, or any other apartment complex. We'll be happy to go with our staff and present about how the program works and provide assistance. So it's very simple. All we need is a copy of the lease that covers rent pay in 2023, a copy of income taxes or any other any forms that support how like the income in the year you're applying for, documentation, and the application. That's all. It's sent to the state. You wait for the state to do the review, and they determine whether you are approved or denied.
So I see a couple of questions here, again, that's sort of based on source of income. I don't think that matters. I think it's just about how much your income is. Is that correct?
Yes. So you can see page 2, wages and income. You are required to disclose all sources of income for all household members. So this is a household application per household. So you can see here, even if it's not included in your taxes, like if you have family members that provide financial support, or if you get gifts over 300, expenses paid by others, anything else will have to be reported.
And the same thing is a single people can apply for this. They just have to be within the income eligibility. Is that right?
Yes. Age 60 or older or 100% disabled do not have to have dependents to apply.
Right. So the question I see here about, if I receive retirement benefits, it's not about the source of income, it's about how much of the income you receive.
Yes. So here in this page, that's where everything gets disclosed. So for applicant, spouse, or co-tenant, or any other household member.
I saw somebody make a comment about they're going to make you jump through hoops. Of course, they're going to make you jump through hoops. It's public money, and they want to make sure that it's going for the right thing. And like all of our bureaucracies in constant need of improvement, they're probably asking you to jump through too many hoops. But nevertheless, they have to be accountable to the public to make sure this is going where it's supposed to go. Other questions for Carmen Castro-Conroy?
Carmen, so the question is, I'm just talking about age. Do you have to be 60 throughout for the entire year?
60 for the year that you're applying for the benefit. So
if you're applying for let's say 2023, you have to be a full 60 throughout that year. If your birthday's in yeah, okay, got it. Thanks.
Actually, I think she just said the opposite. Is that if you're 60 on December 30th, then it still counts for that year, doesn't it?
That's a technical question. I can reach out to the state, or we should probably call ahead and confirm.
Well, I'm not going to bet my life on this, but my guess is your instinct was correct, that if you're 60 the year you apply, then that's the age that counts.
Yes.
But
Okay.
by all means, I'm not a lawyer. Okay.
So just a couple of things. This is separate from any type of credit you get when you file your income taxes. So there's the earned income tax credit, that's separate. This is the renter's tax credit. So most tax preparers will not be submitting this application on your behalf. And sometimes we get that from clients who come to the office and, no, but my tax preparer deals with that. And most likely tax preparers are not submitting this application. If you do not provide a copy of your lease and cannot, have not signed this application, most likely you have not submitted. Another thing to keep in mind, if anyone that's listening files taxes with a tax ID, you're also eligible. So Social Security number or tax ID. And you can only be a tenant paying rent directly to the owner or the property manager. Because we've had tenants that are subleasing from other tenants would not be eligible. And you have to show that you have paid rent in the state of Maryland for at least 6 months.
That's key.
Mhm.
Other questions for Carmen Castro Conroy from the Housing Initiative Partnership on the Renter Tax Credit Program or anything else?
Back filing, I see a question. So it's only allowed to those age 70 or older to go back, and it's retroactive 3 years. So you will need to complete 3 applications.
Okay. Somebody's saying they have a question that they haven't gotten to yet. Let's see if we can find it.
Well, there was a couple questions where they went ahead and put in their household breakdown and income by household member. And that's the exact kind of thing that I think you can come in to the HIP office with and make an appointment to review on the document. So we repasted that Germantown office number and the website that Carmen provided earlier.
Okay.
And I'll be happy to share my email address if anybody is interested in inviting HIP to make a presentation about this program. castro@hiphomes.org.
Yeah, if you have if your question is not answered, we'll give you another few minutes to put it in the chat, and we'll happy to take a look-see. All questions should go, and concerns should go in the chat, as we said at the top.
You had another one. We had it come up again, which I've seen a couple times. So if you're 55 and you have no dependents, you would not be able to file for this, was the question. And just, yeah, I think you just confirmed that a minute ago, that you'd have to be over 60 if you had no dependents.
Yes.
Or fully disabled, like you said, excuse me.
Yes.
Marie, you're going once or going twice. If we didn't get to your question, put it in the chat, please. A reminder, we're not the emperors of legislation as much as we'd like to be from time to time. If there's county legislation that is either not strong enough or doesn't exist, or a process that's not working well, we're all able to contact our council members, the county executive's office, and urge that they make changes. That's what we're all about. We have made a lot of changes in Montgomery County, but certainly not enough. But we did so by considering public policy, urging council members to enact improvements in legislation or legislation that never existed before. If at the state level, we now have a governor who is receptive, at least so far we see, to renters' rights, understanding that nearly 40% of the state, as well as our county, lives in rental housing. We have a new Secretary of Housing, Jake Day, at the state level, the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Community Development, who is putting forward legislation to create an Office of Renters' Rights. The governor's office has also supported local enabling legislation to allow for just cause protections. This is unprecedented in the state of Maryland. So now would be a good time if you've got an issue with the renter tax credit program and its process, with the eligibility limits that it sets, to urge your state legislators and the department to reconsider those eligibility requirements. I happen to think that they're kind of unfair and unrealistic for a lot of people. I mean, I can't imagine a family of 9 making $55,000 a year. That sounds pretty tough to me, especially living in Montgomery County. So, these limits have grown over time. It used to be that you absolutely had to be in abject poverty to avail yourselves of these programs. Now they're improving slowly but surely. But if you want them to improve more, we all have to think about getting our elected officials to do the jobs we elected them to do. So reaching out in that way is very important. Did we get that question in?
No. I think, like I said before, I think that was a question with a case breakdown that they would need to come in to the office for.
Okay. All right, then with that, I first want to thank our friend and colleague Carmen Castro Conroy for coming and joining us tonight with this important information. She's put her information in the chat. And of course, if you send information to us or a question to us about this program, we will refer you to the HIP program and to Carmen and her staff to resolve it for you. So thank you very much for coming. This is not the first time we've asked you to come and not the last time we've asked you to come. So we'll probably have you back again to talk about this program again and other issues that HIP is involved in. And we'd certainly like to talk about the homestaying program, which is, of course, a great interest to us, as well as more and more people, particularly seniors, are looking to live together to save money and also to have some community. So again, thank you, Carmen, for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right, with that, we have another few minutes. Again, we'll get to any questions or concerns if you put them in the chat on any topic having to do with renters. But what we like to do is to remind everybody of what's going on in our universe. And one of the things is, again, as I just mentioned, there's a number of pieces of legislation that are being considered by the Maryland General Assembly right now. The General Assembly begins in mid-January and finishes in mid-April. There are several bills that are high priority for us. The first and most important is just cause local enabling. Right now, with just 60 days notice at the end of your lease, your landlord could say without providing any justification that they're not going to renew the lease. If you stay 1 day over your lease, they can then sue you to evict you for tenant holding over, and there's very little defense. This legislation would enable local municipalities to pass just cause protection, requiring a landlord to state a justifiable reason not to renew your lease. It's very important legislation. It's legislation that its lead sponsors are Janelle Wilkins and Vaughn Stewart, delegates Janelle Wilkins and Vaughn Stewart, who are allies of ours. Vaughn is on our board. And we urge you to contact not only Montgomery County state legislators, but also legislators in other parts of Maryland to urge them to support the passage of this legislation. We also have other legislation that the governor has put forward that we are supporting. As we mentioned, in particular, Bill HB 693, which is a renters' rights bill that would form an office for renters' rights in the Department of Housing and Community Development, as well as provide education and resources to renters across the state. So we have published this in our newsletter, and we'll continue to do so in the coming weeks. But be active. They need to hear from you in the state legislature. And here in Montgomery County, Councilmember Kate Stewart, who was on our last renter town hall, is putting forward legislation in the county council that would require landlords to give notice about emergency plans in their buildings, 24-hour contact, and so on. Also very important legislation that we're supporting. I'll turn it over to my staff now to go over some of the basic resources that are available to tenants. And please raise any questions or concerns that you might have, and we'll address them.
I was going to answer one, or just kind of tag on to what you said to one question about the 60 days notice. We had a question that made it sound like someone had got a lease. That one of the provisions said that the landlord can give 60 days notice at any time and to vacate at any time. That if you sign a 12-month lease, they can give you a 60-day notice to vacate at the end of the lease term. That lines up with that. If there's something in there that says they can do it at any time, we would want to see that right away. Please share that. Now, if there's usually provision that says if you substantially breach the lease somehow, then they can, in the middle of the term, give you the notice to vacate, sometimes even faster than 60 days. So that if it's something like that, that would be normal. But if it's something saying that at any point, they can just kind of up and do that. No, well, that if it's no, it needs to be a 1 or 2 year lease that you're offered, like we covered before. But then, yeah, moving on to some of the resources, the ones we get, I think the most questions about recently are some that are administered by the Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS. First of all, there is still a few remaining COVID rent relief dollars floating around. That's not something you can actively apply for like before, but if you are facing eviction, then there's still some money left in that program. And then DHHS has their own emergency services money that rent relief, which is less, but can still cover a month or two of rent, again, if you're facing eviction. And for them, what that means is that you have received a summons, which is going to be the yellow sheet from the district court. You've received a housing court summons. That would be when you would become eligible to reach out to DHHS for those, and we'll put the specific email for housing stabilization that you can contact. Now, if you're before you get summoned to court, though, with that yellow sheet, you should, by law, you have to receive what's called a 10-day notice. It says notice of intent to file a summary ejectment, and it's the notice that they're going to do that court filing ahead of time. So please reach out to us if you receive one of those and you have questions that doesn't quite trigger the rent relief from the county at that point, and because it's not certain the landlord will go to court or not. But that's being summoned to court for failure to pay rent is what would allow you to apply for the county rent relief. And then again, that's like a one-time payment if you're facing eviction. Something else I like to highlight is the county's rental assistance program, or RAP program. Again, this is not something that you can just log on and apply for, but if someone in the household has a disability or is over 55, then you can actually apply for monthly payments through this RAP, monthly rental assistance, for a portion of the rent through this RAP program. And for that, you just need to be behind in rent. So again, please reach out if you have questions about any of those, if you might be eligible, and we'll share the DHHS office email where you apply for the rent relief.
Tim and Emily, why don't you guys go into the differences and the resources available through ULTA and code? I see Marie is asking about how one would get a maintenance issue dealt with in her building. Nothing is quick, but there are resources to do that.
So there's code enforcement complaints, which when there's a code violation, like having pests, rodents, mold, broken appliances, like serious defects in the home, like physical defects. And for that, I'll put a link in the chat where you can do an online complaint. You can also call 311, and you can also track like your status, and then they'll look into it and see if they need to send an inspector to your building. But I'll put the link in the chat.
But as a reminder, the first thing you got to do is contact your property manager or your landlord and give them a reasonable opportunity to fix something. You don't want to call code and make a complaint if you haven't told your property manager that you've got a problem or your landlord. Then it'll come back around to bite you, and that would not be fair to the landlord or the property manager. However, as we have seen, if you make a complaint to the property manager and they're not doing anything about it, and you've done every reasonable attempt to communicate, that's when you file the complaint. Tim, you want to go through Ulta?
Sure. Yeah, Ulta is the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. So if you have any issues with, if you think your lease is being violated, or you have issues with your management, then you can file a complaint. But like Matt said, you should try to address it with your management first. I'll link the website there. And just as a note for the elevator problems, I believe that's actually a state. It falls under state regulations, right? So code wouldn't actually be the one to inspect the elevators. Is that right, Matt?
Yes, but you can contact a code also on that, and they should be able to liaise.
Great. And then there was also one question in the chat about going to Ulta. So the question is, if I submit a complaint to Ulta, can I ask that my identity not be disclosed to the landlord? They're worried about retaliation from the landlord. They are a tenant in a large apartment building and it does not have a tenant association. Efforts to organize one have been unsuccessful, perhaps because of building high turnover, which, not as an aside, we can try to help you organize that. But I believe, I don't know if Matt or David has any clarity on whether they can remain anonymous.
They can, but eventually, if it has to do with your apartment, there's going to have to be some understanding of what the issue is and who is affected. On the tenant association thing, this is what we do. And we would want to know a building where there's high turnover, and especially if there's abusive or negligent property management. We have that kind of thing for breakfast. So get in touch with us. We are trying to get Montgomery County to have many more properties that are in compliance and understand the law and treat their tenants with dignity and respect. And part of our effort is to organize tenants so they know their rights, form tenants association for collective protection, as well as collective advancement of the quality of life in your building. So, don't be shy, get in touch with us.
Yeah, and just another little detail on that anonymity question is that we shared earlier, we could put it in again. There is a email address for Ulta that's ulta.intake at Montgomery County. We'll put that in. And they've said specifically that you can email that, ask them kind of a consultation question or a one-off question, let them know you don't want to be identified. But yeah, then if they say, if you're going to go forward with a formal complaint, the whole due process for the landlord will require that all becomes, kind of get out in the open at that point. But they definitely will be able to advise up to a point, like Matt said, anonymously.
Okay, David, you want to also inform people about our work with the ACE program?
Well, right. Which look, I was down at the court today, and the ACE program is about legal representation for tenants in housing court, and I'll give some of the details. Though I will say that it's not fully staffed at the moment, so it's not fully at capacity, but it is going, and it has been going for a while. So the state of Maryland put some funds aside specifically for free legal counsel for tenants. Tenants are generally represented, almost never versus the landlords most of the time, especially in larger properties. So the state trying to deal with that disparity. There are three nonprofit legal service providers in our area that work at this program, and that's going to be CASA and Legal Aid. The Legal Aid Bureau now has more housing attorneys, and then the Homeless Persons Representation Project is involved, but that's who doesn't have staff at this moment. So they're a little short-staffed, but normally they try to be at the court on the failure to pay rent date to represent people on the same day. But then a lot of their more effective work is they also will do kind of longer-term, take a case for representation. You can reach out for an intake and a consultation if you're facing eviction, and that's again. So if you've been summoned to court, then you are that for them. You're facing eviction there, and you can reach out. And there are income restrictions. So yeah, but they are certainly more broad than for the tax credit, for instance, that we were just covering. So it's certainly worth reaching out And again, they're down there. But then at the court also on the second floor, there's a self-help center where there's attorney staff there. You can walk in to that one too.
So just to be clear, though, the ACE program, access to counsel in evictions, access to a lawyer when you're facing eviction. That's what this program was set up for. And unfortunately, it is limited to people, I believe, at approximately the 50% of area median income. So the average median income, 50% of the average median income or below are those who would be eligible to take advantage of this program, though lawyers available in the court can sometimes help regardless of that. If you think that you're facing eviction and you need a lawyer, contact us and we will guide you to either what to do or connect you to the ACE program and get a lawyer for you. We always recommend that everybody goes to court if you have a court summons, and always get in touch with us, and we can guide you and perhaps give you some good advice on how to handle a court summons if you've received one, or perhaps prevent the court date from happening in the first place if we can find a way to resolve it before the court date. Anything else, David?
Well, I was going to give a couple quick notes about HOC things that came up earlier, just because it's been continually coming up in the chat.
In 2 minutes or less.
Okay. Well, just to expand on what the council member said earlier, we do understand. I just want to acknowledge the things that we hear that are very similar to what's being said in the chat, and that we are, we can't solve this. We can't solve the problems that HOC has, but we are along for the ride and glad to do what we can to get their attention in certain situations. And just to tack on to what the council member said, we understand that if you have a housing choice voucher, that the actual property, if they're not subject to the rent regulations and the rent stabilization bill, they can try. We've seen them try to manipulate, kind of the maximum rent possible to get, the maximum voucher amount, and these things that ends up displacing people. And we just want to, again, acknowledge that, and we want to hear from you, if you're running into that, and then also if you're not getting a response from HOC, again, same thing, that we hear that they have capacity issues, and we see it a lot that you're not hearing back from a caseworker or something. So please let us know if you're running into that. You deserve to understand why HOC has stopped paying if you were receiving a subsidy. But then again, yeah, it's a double-edged sword, because there are, as the council member said, some protections. We want just cause eviction protection. HOC buildings and some other tax credit buildings have just cause protection. So please, again, reach out to Hugo, to us, and to each individual property can be different. And we do want to hear from you and try to help as best we can.
Pat, did you want to say one thing about the upcoming elections? There it is. You can actually say it, or you can take your mute. We'll allow you this one time to take your mute off. Just this once.
As always, it's always important to vote. Vote,
Thank you, Pat.
people. Get everybody to vote.
That's right. There are elected officials out there and candidates who support
Yes.
renters, and elected officials and candidates out there who do not. Pay
Right.
attention and make a good choice.
Yeah.
We've got 1 more minute. Let me make a quick announcement. Our next Renter Town Hall is on March 20th, and we will host the new Secretary of Housing for the state of Maryland, Jake Day, to discuss the Governor Westmore, the Moore Miller administration's affordable housing package of legislation that includes the renters' rights legislation. So please join us for that. And of course, we'll be keeping tabs on all legislation. Everybody's on this call will be on this webinar will be included in our database, and we'll receive our newsletters with updates. And we'll keep you informed of that. And please get in touch with us if you have any questions or concerns that did not get addressed tonight, or anything else coming down the road, and refer your friends and neighbors to us as well. We are also like a tenants association or a tenants union. The larger our database, the larger we keep tenants informed throughout this Montgomery County and the state of Maryland, the greater our influence on producing affordable, quality, stable housing for all of us. So with that, again, thank you to Councilmember Will Jawando. Thank you to Carmen Castro Conroy from HIP Thanks to all my staff and